I first met Kristaps in Estonia, and he was sharing with me different ideas that he had for future projects and, about his practice in general. And I've been also, living in the Baltics area just for 3 years. So for me, this context is also quite new. So I was really fascinated to learn from his perspective, how he, approaches this context and how he works between here in the Baltics and, London. And we began, I think, talking about this in my kitchen while we were having lunch. And at first we discussed the banner and the textual part of the work. And this is something like I really enjoy about his work, that it deals with language and communication, and how language forms us, from birth almost, and what it says about the consciousness of a community, of a nation. Myself, I speak Russian and English. So I was very interested in these comparisons between the languages and what the language allows us, to express, and the kind of like the inner mechanics of the language. I was really drawn to this project because also myself, I'm a writer, and I work a lot I also work in between cultures. And I think language is essential to kind of really understand a context. We began talking about how the work and this site needs something else besides these banners, and then Kristaps arrived at this idea of placing this sculpture made from local wood in the shape of a palm tree. We were discussing about how plants and imported plants and indigenous plants, and how they also kind of convey this idea of the exotic, of otherness, of alienation, and so on. When I came here to Daugavpils, I was very struck by the site itself. I had only seen it in photographs, and then when I read more about the history of the fortress and the history of the city, for me the work made even more sense here, and why it was like that. So yeah.
In a sense, the mediums I work with is the sculpture, text, and the image. Image has transformed quite a lot lately, but it's more about like this environment, and you look at this kind of media which really supports the idea. I'm not saying that always the media needs to follow the idea. Sometimes the form itself creates the idea. And here I think it's kind of like balancing both of it, because we have at this building, we have a site, and this work is very site specific. There's these two amazing linden trees growing. So I think that was one of the first bits I started to think about, this relationship between the site, between the real trees growing them, the native trees in this area, the site of the building, this kind of angle courtyard. And so, yeah, trying to imagine and put yourself in that space and thinking how you can interact with each of the elements of the facade and the site itself. Nastya is a real person. She's not an actress, talented but not an actress. And she been a person who been around me for already like around 9 years. And somehow I take quite a lot of images of the random situations, and together with friends, It was just a kind of like, we were traveling the UK, we were in the Wales, and just kind of like that moment, that kind of playful joy of kind of like putting something together as a kind of like funny toy constructor. I don't know, I find that potential of creation beautiful, and I thought that these pictures, they fixated that. I would call it more contextual art. I have this kind of like the opinion that we live now in the contextual art era, if I can call it like that. The text is used already in the art for many, many ages. I don't know if we come back to the David's paintings or architectural forms. The usage of the text itself, it's nothing new. But in this work, my idea of using this text is not to explain it. It's not to explain the work, but to introduce a little bit more of the space for imagination. Why I really love the text? Because it plays with our imagination. When we read the book, it's kind of like, even the color, like let's say green, my green will be different from yours. And it's kind of the world which we create around. It's kind of, first of all, you personalize it. Second of all, you kind of like, you work with your imagination. And in this work, I was kind of like thinking about this imaginative space. What can't we just create? And it's like, for each of us, there's going to be a very individual approach to it. So I see text not so much as didactic explanation, but more as a kind of like the material to continue work, to open it. And I still think that our imagination is one of the strongest tool in the kind of thinking of what we can create. As an image now, the amount of the image which circulates around of us is massive. So it's like, where stays the place for the imagination? What I like about the text, that it's human-made structure, which we use in our everyday life. And already in the previous works, I have played these games with like taking of the words of the sentence, but in a very systematical and technical way. So kind of translating the first, or trying to find the phrase which fits the best the structure in Russian or structure in Latvian, for example in English, because there is more straightforward structure which supports that in Russian and Latvian. Что только мы можем сделать, ko tik mēs nevaram uztaisīt. And then I let the structure, another structure, a system, to create that, well, calling it a poem, the text itself, just by taking of the words. And I think as mentioned before, the language what we use forms our attitudes or decision making in everyday life. And I think it kind of forms our ideas and mentalities as well.
The cooperation has been, very smooth, and for me it's been very exciting to be here and to learn about what the center does. As I said, I was looking in the history of the center itself and how this area is kind of being transformed into a cultural hub. It has all these administrative buildings, and how it's still retains this connection with the past, with different layers of the past, from the period of Napoleon to the Soviet period to now the post-Soviet period, and how you can read in the site these different histories.
I kind of look at myself as explorer. My aims are not to make statements. I think, as Corina mentioned before, I like to look what kind of questions or what kind of interactions this work can create. And if you create this sculpture or work or installation, I'm kind of referring now a little bit back to my overall practice, and it sometimes becomes something else in a relationship to the viewer. Sometimes it becomes very different by replacing it or placing it in a different location. But as I said before, there's no aim to make the statements, but to kind of, as I said, this game with the imagination and what kind of questions your imagination or things can create. As I said, I'm more exploring, and for me it's every work is made not only about like the raising questions, asking, but to experience it together. Like, I'm very curious about myself, to be on that field together with that sculpture, together with these banners, and experience it, the scale, the form, the text, the sculpture. I want to be the viewer as well. I want to be kind of enjoy it as well.